Dr. Greer, has UFO secrecy been ruthlessly enforced by our government? And if so, why? Why would the government need to be so secret about it if it indeed is happening?
Well, the secrecy has to do with the technology behind how these UFOs operate. And back when the secrecy first started, let's say in the 40s, in that era, the secrecy was because they didn't know what the heck they were dealing with, and that was understandable. By 1954, this is a very important date, October 1954, which is a year before I was born, and I'm no spring chicken, we had mastered what's called gravity control, electromagnetic gravitic systems, or so-called anti-gravity is how pop culture would say, would describe it. And actually up until that point in the literature, aerospace literature, there was open discussion about anti-gravity, UFOs, things of this sort, and then it went black. And the reason it went black in that era is that the financial cartels, mainly, did not want people to understand that we have not needed oil or gas or jet engines or these things for decades. So this is really a technology story. It has very little to do with little green or gray men out there. And so what began in that era during the late Truman and Eisenhower period was a structure of secrecy called unacknowledged special access projects. And I'm sure that you as a military guy may have come across these or heard of them. And
I don't think so.
Well, the unacknowledged ones are off the books. They are not acknowledged to anyone who's not in the compartmented operation, and up to and including the President of the United States. And this is something we can actually prove, and it's a terrible breakdown in our constitutional oversight system.
So what you're saying is that the reason they're hiding this from us is because the technology's there that we wouldn't need the fossil fuel industry?
We would not, no, we do not need oil, gas, or coal, or nuclear power, or centralized utilities, and have not needed them for decades. So you're talking several $100 trillion in assets that would be impacted by the disclosure of the fact that we're not alone. Because the very first thing any physicist is going to ask is, how did they get here? And when they ask that, if they look at this seriously and look at this, for example, this documentary, Unacknowledged, is the #1 documentary on iTunes worldwide this year and on Netflix, what you're going to find is that this has been known and studied for 70 years, and that the technologies have gone through many generations of development. So the whole charade about global warming and what do we do about it, and et cetera and so on, the solution is there, but the problem is people don't want the solution to come out because it will terminate hundreds of trillions of dollars in oil, gas, and coal wealth, and the petrodollar system that the whole world has developed around macroeconomically since Bretton Woods and after World War II. So this is a huge problem. It has very little to do with the fact that there's intelligent life out there. It's a human problem of the abuse of power and the secrecy that has devolved into these unacknowledged special access projects, which are really rather frightening in how they operate.
Talk about the historic files you've uncovered. What do these files reveal?
Well, for example, in the movie Unacknowledged, we have an Air Force intelligence officer who admits that he worked this issue, an Air Force Office of Special Investigations officer out of Kirtland Air Force Base, and that we have facilities in Nevada at the Lockheed Skunk Works and elsewhere where we have essentially reverse engineered these extraterrestrial craft that we have obtained and studied for many decades. And the military part of it is really the lesser part of it at this point. It's more the overall intelligence community and the corporate and financial community that wants to keep this secret. Most of the high-ranking officers I've met with would love to see this disclosed properly. But I think that, including generals and admirals at the Pentagon, and I think that we're in a situation right now where you have the tail wagging the dog. But one of the cases that really struck me as extraordinary, that it was admitted, it's actually in the book. There's a book that accompanies the documentary, and the book is the same title, Unacknowledged. And as you know, a book contains a lot more information than a documentary can. What you find in that one account from this Air Force officer is that we were test flying one of these retrieved extraterrestrial vehicles, but we had switched out the power plant. We didn't quite know how theirs worked, with something that had a nuclear component. It malfunctioned outside in Houston, and it's called the Cash Landrum case, and it irradiated all these innocent civilians on the ground as it was going down. And this Air Force officer, Doty, who was the principal investigator of this crash landing, was actually the debriefer also of the pilots, the human pilots of this object. And it came out of Nellis Air Force Base, what people call Area 51, although that's not the proper name for it. And this was a case where these civilians were critically injured with spewing radiation out of this craft. And it was covered up by the government. They tried to sue for it because there were military helicopters trying to escort this thing down that eventually did land after this core breach of the nuclear system on board. But this is a case now where we have a long-standing officer in the Air Force, a career man, admitting that this happened. He was the principal case. Now take that case, and I have 850 military and intelligence and corporate people like him in my archive now.
How high up do these black ops space things go within our government? How high do these projects go?
Well, it's a very good question. It really depends on the person and not the structure. So I'm going to say something here that's a little shocking. It really doesn't matter if you're the president or the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. It matters if you're willing to go along with the agenda of the secrecy. And here's what I mean by that. I'll give you one great example. Some years ago, I briefed the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Tom Wilson. So he was J2, I'm sure you're familiar with that system. And it was a stand-up briefing at the Pentagon. I had astronaut Edgar Mitchell with me in attendance, and some of our military contacts who had handled these cases all the way back to the Eisenhower years. I had given the Admiral a secret document from the National Reconnaissance Office, which runs all the secret spy satellites, that listed the code names and code numbers as of the early 90s managing this issue. He actually recognized one of them and contacted one of those compartmented operations. When he got hold of them, he was told, "Sir, you do not have a need to know." And he says, "God damn it, how can I not have a need to know? I'm the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff." And they said, "Sir, we will not discuss this with you further," and hung up on him. So it's a very big problem. So have there been people in J2 who have been read into this or briefed on it? Yes. But this particular man, they did not want to know because they didn't think he would go along with the agenda. And the same thing was true of General Patrick Hughes, three-star general that I briefed, who was head of the Defense Intelligence Agency. Now, I sat with him in his offices. He had made specific inquiries of actionable intelligence we had given him. He was denied any information. In fact, he was just ridiculed. And he told me that people on his staff wouldn't tell him, and he asked me why. I said, well, what would you do if you found out there was an illegal criminal operation going on within our government, much bigger than 1,000 times bigger than Watergate, and that was keeping from the public the things that would make our world an incredibly, beautiful place without pollution and poverty within a generation? He says, well, I wouldn't stand for that. He said, I would uphold the Constitution. I said, yes, you would. And that's why they're not going to tell you a damn thing. So it has very little to do, Governor, with your rank. It has more to do with whether, I call it, they do a soul biopsy. I'm a doctor, I'm a trauma doctor by training. And so I say they actually do a deep analysis of your psychology. Are you going to go along with this or not? If the answer is a chance of not, I don't care if you're the director of the CIA. I sat with R. James Woolsey, Clinton's CIA director, for almost 3 hours, and he and President Clinton made specific inquiries into this issue and were denied access. And now, he later tried to cover up that meeting. Because I always say, in Washington, how do you know the lawyers are lying? Their lips are moving. But I'm sorry to say that. But
I don't feel so bad today when I did conspiracy theory when I'd get turned down. Geez,
yeah.
I'm in pretty good company, aren't I, for people that can't get questions answered by the government.
Exactly, exactly. And you're now talking about the director of the CIA, the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency, and the head of Intelligence Joint Chiefs of Staff, all of whom I have privately briefed, not to mention members of the Senate Intelligence Committee, et cetera, and so on. So what you find with this is that it really has very little to do with your rank. It's whether you're willing to go along with the secrecy. Now, are there senators who know? Yes. Senator John Warner of Virginia was a member of the committee handling this. Would he admit the existence of these programs to fellow senators? No, he would not even in his own party. Now, I know this for a fact because I am friends with his son. So I think that this is a very complex story. We try to sort of touch on it a little bit in the documentary and more in the book, which you can get at Amazon or Barnes & Noble, what have you. But it's a story really not so much about life in outer space, which most people assume there's intelligent life out there. It's how we have misfired in our civilization for the rule of law, the Constitution, and what have you, has just been swept aside by people desperate to keep this secret to protect their power. It's all about power.
Yeah. Just to have some fun here at the end, though, I got to ask you. So extraterrestrials have made contact with us?
Yes, there have been events where they have, well, we have 4,000 cases where they've landed on the ground. And for example, the case in Bentwaters, the Air Force Base in England, there was a craft that landed that was basically a pyramid-shaped object, and there was contact between the U.S. military officers there in England at RAF Bentwaters and the extraterrestrials on board. So that has happened. It's well documented. We have their case histories. We have tape recordings of the officers who were there talking about what happened. We have their videotapes and their testimony. In fact, we have so much evidence that it's sort of outrageous that, you know, this is not the first thing that you see on CNN and the Washington Post and New York Times, but there are two. One of the things, if you look at the movie Unacknowledged, you'll see that the media is a big part of the problem. The media has very systematically covered this up at the request of the IC, the intelligence community.
You know, I don't get it. Couldn't they still cover up the fact that the fossil fuel industry would still exist and still let us know that there is people beyond our Earth, that there's an intelligent source and that we know about it? We're not capable of understanding that. I mean, these people ain't no better than me.
Well,
and I've been on
yes.
both sides of the fence. I've been a governor and a mayor, and I've been a regular citizen and military.
Right, right.
I can handle it.
Yeah,
why don't they give me the benefit of the doubt?
Well, because they're afraid of two things. One, the scandal of how this has been kept secret would just shock people, frankly. We don't have time to go into all the murder and mayhem that has occurred. I can tell you that there are 3 people on my team in the early days who were assassinated trying to get this information out through me. I will also tell you that the fact that the ETs, these civilizations are watching to see if we want to grow up or not. They're not going to land at the Super Bowl. They sort of had the whole prime directive thing. You know, they're waiting to see if we, get half a clue before something massive happens. However, if you were to acknowledge that they're here in near-Earth orbit even, let's say that they would say, oh, well, we detected an interstellar vehicle in our solar system. Well, people are going to ask, how did it get here? And that's the end of oil, because I can assure you that as soon as the mainstream media and science community ask that questions, they are going to, if they start digging into this, they're going to find out how those things operate, because this is virtually an open secret. It just is unacknowledged.
You know, I got to tell you, Doctor, one of my favorite films of all time is the original The Day the Earth Stood Still with Gort.
Yeah, I agree. It's awesome.
And I mean, I watched that film, and what you talked to me today about tells me that that wasn't so far-fetched after all, was it?
Exactly. And in fact, the way that we responded to their presence, I have been told that there are people in our State Department who assisted in the making of that film as a counterpoint to the dysfunction that was going on inside the military-industrial complex. And this is why Eisenhower said, beware the military-industrial complex. And Eisenhower was a 5-star general. So I think that film actually was made in response to that.
Well, Dr. Greer, thank you. I'd love to have you back on. I could listen to you all day tell a story. So
Great.
thank you, and thank you for coming on RT.
Thank you.
We're having difficulty getting guests now, and I appreciate it that you come on.
Oh, I'll speak to anyone who has an open mind to listen. Thank you for your work. Appreciate it.